With only 2 episodes in of One Punch Man Season 3, responses for the season in question have thus far been mixed, with the majority of the so-called fandom slandering as animation, even go so far to state that the season is already a huge flop, and others trying to defend it by saying how JC's staff is saving up the budget for the bigger events coming up. Now me personally, after watching the episodes with my own eyes, I do agree that some of what they say holds true, but I also feel that they are overreacting, especially since 3rd season has just barely started. Not to mention, we still haven't received any new fight scenes that will appear later in the season, so saying it will be terrible right off the bat is a bit premature. At the very least, in terms of composition, shading, the overall coloring, and whatever else that's been done to the season's own visual design, the art style did end up looking a lot better than Season 2's lackluster appearance. Plus, after getting some new scenes of Garou vs Bug God and Royal Reaper, it should tell fans that the rest of the upcoming fights will look decently well too, even if it's not Season 1 quality. That being said, Season 3 is off to a rough start, and the only way that JC's staff can turn things around is by somehow managing to continue making the other fights look less of a PNG slideshow and contain more of that slick and fluid animation that can be best described as peak cinema. I know that sounds almost impossible, but it might not be if the season will get better as it moves on. Moreover, I have heard that the current season is being worked on by a few well-known and talented animators within the industry, so there's hope. But while trying to hold some bit of faith that the studio might be able to pull it off with some of the fights, it's the ones that are considered the best that's going to be the most challenging. So, without delay, welcome to Animate 9000, a channel where we talk about content related to anime, manga, and other types of media. In this video, I'll be going over the top best yet difficult to animate fights in One Punch Man Season 3. Fair warning, there will be spoilers up ahead. Also, as usual, if you want to hear more of the contents I mentioned earlier, just subscribe and hit the notify bell. Starting with the honorary mention, the first fight that I want to briefly talk about is Atomic Samurai vs Black Sperm. Now, for the most part, some of the fighting that occurred during this event did happen off screen, so I was kinda debating as to whether or not the fight should be here. Regardless, there are a few scenes in this fight that I think will slightly improve people's views about the season, but that's only if the animators can pull their weight. In this case, it's a moment where Atomic Samurai will unleash his signature technique, Atomic Slash, to cut down a horde of Black Sperm clones, and considering how the sequence lasted for about 8 pages, with a lot of fluid motion, that's a lot of ground to cover, unless there's going to be some cut scenes. Naturally, I'm not expecting it to be perfect like in the manga, but at the very least, in addition to making the movement of each sword swing looking less stiff, the anime has to make it feel like there's some sort of pressure and force coming from each said swing, further giving off the impression that the attack is unblockable. Other than that, the rest of the fight should be manageable. Another honorary mention that I want to quickly talk about is a fight that involves the character Tatsumaki. Well, 2 fights sort of, since the entirety of one did take place off screen, and the other was rather short. However, both events do contain moments that would further showcase Tatsumaki's immense strength, and from the way the second ranked hero displayed her psychic powers during this part of the arc, let's just say that a simple slideshow isn't really an option. For instance, when Tatsumaki was about to face off against the monster Evil Eye, both cabanas were releasing so much psychic energy that the two inadvertently created a tornado in the air. What's more, it's not even a small tornado. In fact, it seemed like it was big enough to cover a city, and based on how the onlookers were reacting to such a feat, the anime would need to correctly portray the same scenario where the tornado was so strong, it for a moment was affecting the area the heroes were in. I mean, it sounds easy enough to animate, but as for her fight against Garou, that might be a bit more tricky since we will be getting moments where both characters will exert more of their psychic energy as the fight drags on, such as ones where the dragon level monster tries to crush Tatsumaki, and another where the hero will soon overpower the monster by twisting his body. After which, not much else can be done for now, but there's already enough scenes that can't be looking too mediocre. Getting into the actual list now, the fight we'll be beginning with is Zombieman vs Pureblood, a fan favorite within the OPM community, and despite being in this video, is one of the few fights that I relatively think should be the easiest to animate and less likely to disappoint fans. I know that sounds a bit presumptuous, but compared to the other fights that I'll be mentioning later on, the fight between these two doesn't involve a lot of heavy movement. I mean, there are some movements, but overall they should be doable. Plus, what makes this fight so well loved by fans is partly because of its gothic theme appearance and aesthetic atmosphere, with the two cabanas making the fight look like it came straight out of a dark horror fantasy action game. Nevertheless, there are some moments where things do get a bit flashy. One in particular is the moment where Zombieman would reload his twin Desert Eagle guns with much powerful ammunitions and fire them off at Pureblood. The other are both characters' high-speed regenerations, which in the case of the hero will be the first time animated in this season. So the anime not only has to make the healing process look fast, but also broken to the point that the character seems unkillable. Besides those, the rest of the fighting also mostly happened off-screen, with Zombieman being the sole winner in this battle of endurance. So because of that, I think the fight should do good in the anime. Regardless, this is where we make our way to the more challenging fights to animate. And one of them is Flashy Flash vs Galewind and Hellfire Flame, as it involves a lot of heavy and high speed movement. And I mean a lot, since the fight will be focusing on characters who are able to move so fast. They once traveled across a large room within less than a second, and at one point, created a dome of light, which I don't know if the anime will adapt that one, but chances are it will be removed. Nevertheless, while I can imagine the first half of the fight doing alright in the anime, maybe even slightly better if the animators were to surprise us, is the second half that's a bit unclear. Because as soon as Galewind and Hellfire Flame turn into their monster forms, well, let's just say that the intensity of the fight switched up to 11. Like all three cabanas were moving so incredibly fast that everything around them was moving at slow motion. Not even an exaggeration, because by the time they make their way from one destination to another, the explosion they caused from each step they took hasn't even fully initiated. Additionally, just when it seemed like it couldn't get any more impressive, near the end of the fight, we see how once Flashy Flash was able to stun his opponents to a near halt, the former would then head towards the location of his sword, grab onto it, and return to wherever he was while also cutting down the 2 dragon level monsters. Then, as the surrounding area begins to go back to normal speed, we would also get a clear view of the destruction they've done after moving around a lot. Frankly, it's details like these that makes me wonder how the season is going to do this fight justice. Luckily, this fight won't appear until later on, so here's hoping it ends up being okay once it arrives. But for Garou vs Monster King Orochi, the next fight I'll be going over, that's a bit more worrisome, and after rereading the fight again in the manga, it did cause me to wonder if JC's staff has the capabilities of not turning this into a disaster. Which is a problem since this is the first major fight we'll see in the coming weeks, and the situation gets worse when you factor in the insane design of Monster King Orochi's monster form. Granted, the fight only has a few handful of good moments that the animators could focus on getting it right, and I'm fairly certain that Orochi's monster form will be animated in 3D, but still, even with that fact, I'm a bit unsure on how it will meet our minimum expectations. What's more, if you were to include Garou's prior confrontation with Overgrown Rover, which was very explosive to say the least, the fight gets even more difficult to animate. Like, we have moments that show Garou dodging and enduring many of Orochi's and Rover's attacks, while also trying to throw in some counters of his own against them. And then there's the Monster King himself in his monster form, shooting out beams of fire that's burning everything around him, and throwing a devastating punch at the hero hunter. Once those scenes are done, the only noteworthy events left are probably the arm movement which both fighters perform to take on their martial arts stance, as well as this amazing shot of Garou launching himself towards Orochi before the fight cuts off, and we ultimately see the former being defeated. So yeah, some scenes to handle before the fight appears in the anime, especially how it's those very scenes that will let us know how the rest of the season will turn out. So if it ends up being mediocre, well, that's pretty much the moment where a lot of OPM fans will drop the season. Of course, at this point, the fight must be done now, so I have to wait to see how it'll go. Moving up the list, we have Child Emperor vs Phoenix Man, and compared to the other fights that I went over, this one is going to be tougher to animate than I initially thought. Because taking into account of how JC's staff is going to make Child Emperor's Brave Giant look more alive in the anime, they might also be adding and mixing in some scenes from chapters that have been retconned by Yusuke Murata himself. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's going to happen at all, but based on the opening theme song, where it makes small references to the fight, it could be a possibility. And if that's the case, including the events of the official chapters that I'm sure the studio will mostly adapt from, such as the unique abilities of Phoenix Man's resurrected form, and Brave Giant chasing Phoenix Man around the hallway, as well as the moment where the robot would punch large-sized holes that leads him deeper down the Monster Association's headquarters, we could also be getting Millennium Emperor Nova, a powerful attack unleashed by Brave Giant, and the scene of how it was able to reach all the way to the planet's surface. Not to mention Phoenix Man's brilliant Ego Mode, a form granting the monster more power, and his much stronger looking ability to somehow revive the dead. Truth be told, I don't know how JC's staff is going to make all of this work. Then again, some could be mediated by mixing in 3D animation, but frankly, I think the studio got enough of their hands full. The same can be applied to Saitama vs Monster King Orochi. In fact, much like the fight between Child Emperor and Phoenix Man, there's a slight chance that this fight in the anime might contain some scenes from the retcon chapters as well. As such, we could be getting scenes where Monster King Orochi would not only be showcasing more of his supposedly immense strength, but also using techniques that he copied from Garou. One example I can give is when the character was focusing all of his attacks at the bald hero, and it was shown to be so powerful, it sent Saitama a far distance away, forcing the latter to quickly run back to where Orochi was. Also, as an extra bonus, they might even readapt that one scene when Saitama seemingly killed Orochi with one punch, except this time in the anime, the Monster King survives it. Though honestly, I'm just guessing on that one, but if the anime will contain the other moments, then that's already a lot for the animators to do, especially since they have to adapt the 2 other moments in the official chapters, and they're slightly more difficult to animate. One of them is Orochi unleashing Gaia Cannon, a massive energy attack, which he prepares by drawing energy from the Earth's core, and upon doing so, just the build-up alone can give us a sense of how powerful the attack was. Right after that, we then have Saitama unleash his own powerful attack, which he dubs Serious Squirt Gun. It's frankly stupid as it sounds, but the power behind it is no joke, as we can see based on this spectacular scene of both attacks clashing against each other. Next thing we know, the fight pretty much ends with a typical one-shot punch by Saitama. And now that I'm mentioning said punch, the scenario where Saitama defeats Orochi in the official chapters is another moment that's going to be tough to get right. Although I am half expecting the studio to cut a few corners with this event, considering how this will be the last fight that Saitama is going to be in until next season or so, the staff and animators have to at least make it look way better than what went down in the season 2 finale. Maybe I'm being a bit optimistic, but I doubt the studio is setting themselves to ruin even further if they don't try to do this fight justice. Anyway, that's pretty much all the best, yet most difficult to animate fights we'll likely have in season 3. Of course, there is a slight chance that more could get squeezed in, depending on whether or not the season will exceed 12 episodes, but that remains unclear. Regardless, if you have anything to say regarding the fights, just leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.